Hello there, Matthew. Welcome to the podcast and welcome to an episode of Thoughtful Mind. Good to have you here.
Great to have you here. It's so good to talk again.
So, Matthew, you know what's funny? I was thinking before we did this, like, we've been saying we're going to do this for a very long time, and I'm both excited and relieved that we finally got to doing it.
Yeah, we kept our word, but it took us a good 6 months. Huh?
All right. So obviously, Matthew, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself to the audience. I mean, to me, you're a brother. I know you so well, but and I'm actually interested to hear this. How would you introduce yourself to the audience? So go ahead.
Yeah, that's a tricky one actually. Well, technically, I'm an AI researcher, right? So I'm doing a PhD at Cambridge working on AI. But what I've been doing mostly of late has been writing essays, on philosophy, phenomenology. So more on how do we solve, the problem that we're facing right now with AI? AI taking over the jobs, AI making people feel a bit lost about their life. So I think there's a bigger challenge than the technical one. It's more like a spiritual, lived difficulty, and so that's what I've been doing for the past couple of months.
Just on a side note, Matthew, I'm going to ask you just to kind of speak a bit louder so we can just
Oh
hear you
yeah,
on
yeah,
the
sorry.
air.
Apologies. Do you hear me?
No, that's
Yeah.
totally fine. Let's just crack on with it. So as you said, that's your introduction, Matthew. Like one of the reasons I remember when I first met you, which is a random story, but we're not going to get onto it in the Airbnb. One of the first things I said is, this guy, I admire him because he likes to tackle big ideas. He's not a small game player. So I know you always like to tackle big ideas about meaning, and we've had so many discussions about it. And I hate to sound like an academic when I frame this question, but so what's the overarching question? What's the problem for the audience that you're trying to address if you were to sum it?
No, great question. Well, I think it'd be how do we flourish in an age of massive change, right? It requires, so there are like multiple sub problems from that, It would require knowing yourself, so a deeper understanding of what it is to be human than we had before. And then a second one, which is once we know ourselves a bit better, how do we apply this to interact with a changing world in a better way so that we don't lose our autonomy or that we stave off all the obstacles and issues that can come in, when the world is changing at a crazy pace.
All right, and it's very timely because I mean, if there was ever a time to talk about the world is changing at a crazy pace, and how do we identify meaning and all that kind of stuff, this is the right time to today. So just to kind of elaborate on what you said, the world is changing at a quick pace, and we need to, understand ourselves better. Like, just elaborate what do you mean by that? So someone can say, for example, yeah, I understand myself really well. I go to work. I have my whatever, my kids, my family. I interact. So what are you going on about? Like I know who I am. So what would you elaborate on what you mean
No,
by
that's a great
understanding
question.
yourself?
Yeah, but like we have the illusions that we know ourselves because our environment is so stable. So you go to work, you do your little routines, so you know how you behave within this parameter. But that's just because it's very rigid in a way. And when things change, well, you can be surprised. You can be stressed, or you can react in a way which you would not have expected. And that's what's happening right now, with AI, with all the changes in the world. Like, we don't have a fixed, stable world anymore. And that's when self-knowledge becomes extremely important, right? Because when you have, for instance, AI content that can sometimes know yourself even better than you know yourself, you're at risk of being manipulated, or you're at risk of having, the worst parts of yourself actually come out. And so that's when self-knowledge, self-control becomes even more important, because you're dealing with a world which we don't really have, the routine, the bearings to actually navigate.
That's a very, very interesting concept, which I actually want to tap into that because you say in this world where there's AI and there's all kind of external influences, social media, and self-knowledge is one of the most important things. One of the things that I think about, or I think a lot of people grapple with, is what is self-knowledge, what is truth. Somebody would just say it's our experiences, right? There's no one singular truth. It's just our life experiences, our environment. They shape who we are. So, like, what is self-knowledge? In that sense.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think there's like one psychological answer to that, and there's one which is like, I think deeper and which is spiritual. The psychological would be like, okay, how do you behave in all different types of situation? Some person might, what are your preferences, right? Do you like tomatoes? Do you like cherries? So it would be just a list of like traits and facts about you. But I think this in a way is not the deepest thing, because for one, it's never finished. You can always deep dive, and you can always try to know this infinity of things about yourself. It's just facts, right? Like the spiritual one, that's when you say what is somebody's core. What do they care about, and how do they create a hierarchy between their life. You need to have some sort of coherence between everything. And you have to put your priorities, otherwise your life is a mess. So people have implicit hierarchies. They would put some put their work before their friends, some their friends before their work. And when you get to like a fundamental hierarchy, that's when you've got the self-knowledge. And so I think that's what we should really focus on at a time when the world is changing so fast.
And that's really interesting because you said about the hierarchy and setting the priorities. So I'm a bit controversial in that I think the priorities, a lot of people would argue with me and they say, like, let it be. Everybody will have their own priorities. For some people, it might want to be their job or, I don't know, their dog or their cat. I'm a bit controversial in that I say, no, like, it shouldn't be that way. There is a list and order, you know what I mean? So what would kind of your take be on that? I'm just curious to hear that because you talk about the hierarchy and how that gives you meaning. Like, so how do people set that? Are there fundamentals, principles? Is it just kind of everybody sets it based on whatever their preference is?
No, that's a great point. I think here we're getting really into the deep of like basically philosophical questions. No, you're absolutely right. Like there's priorities which you can have for the short term. So for instance, putting your work before your friends, for instance, that give temporary meaning, but that always imply that you're searching for something else. When you find people who have such a deep passion for what they do, which is also my case. It's always about the people. You're always doing your work for people. And so the base level, maybe like the most trivial one, is doing it for social recognition. There are people that also do the work because they want to help the world in one way or another. But it all comes back to people, to the change that you actually want to make. And so when you like dig a bit into the priorities, you realize that there's always the same constant. People want to bring a contribution. They want to do it for an aesthetic vision of the world, like a vision of what they think is good and what they think is beautiful. And so I think it always boils down to that, like when you're really clear about what is it that you found ethically and aesthetically powerful, well, then that's when you found like the core of the priorities. And I don't think there's so many choices, like in terms of what you find aesthetically and ethically worth it. I think people broadly converge. They broadly converge on the fact that knowledge and respect are better than the opposite.
I think that's very, very well articulated. I like how you articulate it. At the end of the day, everything we do is for the people. I like to believe that, it's some shape or form. We're all doing different things and whatnot. But I think in essence, what we want to do is something where we feel happy or good at the end of the day, is something for the people. My thing is that I feel like, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, is sometimes we kind of conflate, not meaningless, but tedious tasks. Like, for example, we might be doing our day-to-day job, which, is not really that much for the people, but somebody will finish and say, like I'm doing, I'm doing it for my colleagues or whatnot. Do you know what I mean? And then I might argue, well, is that really for the people, or is that just kind of within your closed community? Do you know what I mean? Because a lot of people say that. You'll see a lot of people will say, I get by my job, I'm good to my colleagues, I come back, I feed my kids, which is amazing, if they have kids or whatever. Is that what we're alluding to, or are we trying to kind of say something a bit, on a bigger scale, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, you make a great point. I think there's levels to it, right? Which is once you've got the basics, which is that you can do it like for the people, like you said, but for your closed circles, or you've reached, like in a way, the fundamental level, right? Which you're doing it for the few people that really matter in your life, and that's where we start, right? That's the most important one. But if you manage to do it well, if you manage to like find something that actually works, where like the people around you are aligned, and you can feel that there's strength in the connection, and then in the happiness, well, then in that case you can enlarge it, right? And so I think that's where we can actually do it for the people, but on a broader scale. And sometimes some people they try to skip the steps, but it's never really grounded if you don't have like this basic level.
Yeah, and I'm going to dive in here, and Dora, we'll get to your works a bit later. The reason why I'm bringing up this point is because I remember you said something to me, which I still believe till now is changing the trajectory of my life, because I was kind of like that too a couple of years ago. And I remember once, I really remember it really clear actually. We were on a phone call and you were telling me like, how's things going? I'm like, yeah, things are going good. I'm doing good in my work. I'm coming back. I'm chatting to family. And then you kind of said something which kind of like ignited something in me, which was like, like, haven't you thought about doing something more than that? And then, then I went on and kind of started doing things on the social media and whatnot. And it just kind of ignited that thought, which is why I wanted to bring that up, and I just thought it's very important, like to kind of discuss this in this podcast, like how do we elevate to that next level? Do you know what I mean? Because I think that's the challenge. There is a lot of comfort in that zone where it's like, it makes sense. I go to work, I know what I have to do to get a promotion or make the boss happy. I come back home, my family, they're my blood family. I know what makes them tick, whatnot. And this is but then when you want to kind of go to that, that's when you introduce an element of uncertainty, or, you know what I mean? Now there's a lot of factors, you're trying to now influence people who don't even know really well, or and whatnot. So how does somebody sort of, I don't know if I'm babbling or I'm articulating the question well, but how does somebody, what's the steps they have to take, you know what I mean, to be able to make that transition? Because it's not easy. I'm still grappling with it till this day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, same. I don't think I have any really great points or advice on that, because I'm also trying to figure it out. But I think that like what we're doing right now, and what we started to do, whether it's social media and all that, like given that there's so little effort that it requires for us to just bring it to like a wider audience, well, there is no excuse not to do it, and I feel that this is pretty much like the steps between all these different levels. I think you feel the need to do more once you've already got a firm ground, which is your case, like with family, with your fiance, with everyone, right? There's already a strong ground. So when the ground is strong, that's when you tell yourself, well, you know what, somebody else needs to hear the message, because some people have not solved this problem. Some people are still struggling with their family, friends, life and all that. So they need to hear it from like somebody that really has managed to fix it.
Yeah, I really like that approach. I kind of understood what you mean. It's when you get to that level where you've got the core, and then you can then go and spread that whatever you want to call it, that message or that word, or then help somebody who who doesn't have these things in place. So I'm going to probably just move on to some of the things you actually you've been writing about, because I don't want to completely go off track. So I know there's a piece you're working on, and you came up with a term which I've recently became aware of: conscious capital.
Oh, yeah.
And you described it as the rarest form of wealth. So just for the listeners, so what do you mean by conscious capital, and why is this so valuable in our current society?
It's sociological theory, and it's really become pretty big, even on social media quite recently. You've got different types of resource, right? Whether it be wealth, whether it be your social capital, your educational capital, your resources, and there's different types of capitals that have come up. But there's one which I don't think has been talked about, which is that the biggest resource that you have is not so much your wealth, not even your connection, but it's simply just how, like the spiritual awareness that we were just talking about, this ability to give it to others, and I think that's been so undervalued, because I see it, in the interactions, and even like when we talk, like this ability to ask the right questions that make people, feel heard, the ability to also understand the problem, to help them, from a good place, um, that is the most valuable skill. And I think people have started to understand this, but in the American, Anglo-American framework, now it's starting to be traded and be monetized, which is a bit dangerous, right? But you're seeing all sorts of industries, and like becoming yourself develop. But you're also seeing it, amongst people. That is that some people that are a bit lost will want to trade resources. So, for instance, maybe it would be a bit of cultural capital, maybe it'd be a bit of economic capital for someone who has consciousness capital and is able to tell them the truth that they need to hear, which is who they are, where they should go. And it's just starting, but I think there's something to it.
Yeah, that's very interesting because there's quite a few things I want to pick up on. The first one is the definition of conscious capital. So one of the things that freaks me out, to be honest, is when I have chats with even close people, my loved ones, a lot of the time I hear this sentence, I don't know where the time went, or like a week has gone by and I talk to my brother and he's like, yeah, it's just been a very hectic week. I don't even know what happened. I don't know what the time went. Just to make sure I'm not misunderstanding the idea, is there a link between this and conscious capital? Because a part of me says we're just kind of, that just terrifies me. I don't know where the week went, and sometimes like I don't know what happened. So like, are we intentionally, using our time? Are we just kind of, getting stuck in a routine and we're not really conscious of what we're doing, or we're just on autopilot for an easy term to use?
Yeah, exactly. I think that like being on autopilot is one level of alignment, right? But there's people that are even way below, way further away. People who are completely misaligned, or people who really lost. In all these cases, when you have somebody in front of you that's aligned and that tells you things, like you haven't been intentional this week. Well, maybe you should look at what you're doing. Maybe not happy with the way you're currently working, or you're not taking responsibility as you should. Like people who are aware enough to actually tell you things. Well, I think that's what it's about.
I'm glad you got to that. That's very important. So for example, I'm very fortunate. I have you to call me out every now and then when I've had a couple of weeks or whatever, and you'll be like, hey, are you aligned? Are you doing the things you want to do? But not everybody is, and I'm aware of that, is fortunate to have that person in their lives. And I actually see a lot of, sometimes, when I'm wasting time, videos where people have been like, I spent 10, 20 years of my life and I have nothing to show for it now. This comes up in a lot of the things I watch, because probably there isn't that somebody there, and then they realize it when it's a bit, not too late, I don't like to think it's too late, but quite further down the line, they're like, I gave 20, 30 years just working away and I don't have anything to show for it. So what do you think needs to happen? What needs to be in place to kind of like ensure a level of that everybody gets that, or not everybody, that's too idealistic, but where we're not just depending on chance, where I'm very fortunate to have a friend to keep me aligned. So what needs to be done in society or in the modern world to kind of have these checks in place, let's just say?
Brother, that's an amazing point, and that's actually where the capital aspect comes in, because in the ideal world, people would have people that they can actually trust, right? And so it's completely organic. You've got a friend, the light turns off here.
Yeah, they go off usually after
Yeah,
30 minutes or so. Yeah.
But you have a friend to actually tell you, somebody that cares about you enough that it's almost part of their life. It's almost part of who they are. When they know that something is not going too well, they'll give you a text and they'll be proactive. But given that we're in this epidemic of isolation, of lack of communication, well, that's when people are actually trading for it. That instead of creating intentional friendships, or friendships that are spiritually deep enough that somebody can actually tell them the truth, well, then they will trade capital. So we'll spend some time together, and then in exchange you'll get X, Y, and Z. Maybe an invitation to an event, things like that. Which is not authentic or not aligned, But I think that the only thing that people have left, you know, like if they cannot get authenticity, they trade.
That's interesting because that was actually the question that I wanted to ask you because you mentioned something about yeah, you can, it's okay, you can go,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. Because I
it's all
like
good.
if I wave my arms, yeah, it's gonna come
There
out.
we go.
It's all good.
Um, you mentioned about trading capital, and I read that, and that was the thing that I wanted you to kind of give an example of because yeah, I wasn't fully clear on it. So when you say somebody trades capital to get that conscious, so how does that look? Are you trying to say, or maybe I misunderstood it, in that it becomes kind of like a transactional kind of thing where I, whatever, give you something to get like just elaborate on it just for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. Which is that people realize that it's a problem. They realize that they have a need for that. They don't have the resource, and so they will have to use different types of capital. You know, the I think that the most basic form, which would be just giving money, you know, like economic capital, is actually not the main way in which it manifests. You know, it's like paying for a therapist or paying for one of the workshops where you supposedly discover things about you. I don't think that's the way that it actually manifests, but I think it manifests in other way where somebody might have something else to give a friend, so for instance they would give them a special form of would give them energy, they'd be quite happy, but in return they'd have this form of alignment. So it's not like spiritually grounded, it's not like the strongest form of relationship, but it's also a form of where people realize that they need this, and so they give something else in exchange.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm thinking here like there's two kind of thoughts going through my head. So one of it is as you said, is some people trade it for capital, and the ones we kind of know, the therapy, the I don't know whatever workshops there, build yourself. Anyways, I'm not going to throw shade at them. There's that one way, but the other way. So I'm trying to think of, this is just a person I made up in my head. Let's think about the young person who's got no capital to even trade in the first place. Unfortunately, they come from a broken home. Their family connection is not strong. They don't really have anybody rooting for them. Does that make sense? And they don't even have that capital, so they're not even in that position to to pay for therapy or find a. So what's the way for them to kind of cultivate that awareness and build that? You know what I mean? What's the way forward for this person?
But yeah, I mean, and that's incredibly tricky, right? Because even if you start with just a bit of like a resource, and when you're young, I think actually consciousness might be like your most valuable resource, right? Because you've got this energy, you've got this optimism, you've got a form of alignment that people sometimes lose as they age, and so it becomes maybe like your core resource when you're young. When you don't have it, that's a tricky one. The obvious solutions here would be by reading, by talking, by consuming content that actually raises the level of awareness. But of course, in environments where this is not accessible, this would be difficult too. But in a way, this would be the only path. Like when you don't have access to other people to help you or to other resources, well, then the path forward is finding the information online. So all the great novels, all the great philosophical texts, they all have this core of spiritual awareness. Ranging from the ancient Greeks all the way, to modern phenomenology. They all talk about a form of existence that invites you to ask questions, which enables you to be more aligned. So that'd be the way to do it.
Yeah, I like where this is going. So probably for that person, it would be to kind of find the resources or consume, worthy resources or things that can get you to that alignment that you're talking about. Now, I know I'm asking very tough questions there, but it's just I'm unpacking this with you as we go. Is you mentioned about how people are using transactional to get a bit of conscious capital. and this is a very tough question, and probably not something you can answer here, but what would be something more sustainable? Because as you mentioned, and this is something we just discussed a lot outside of this podcast, these things are short term. I might go to a therapy or whatever, or I might have a bit of a discussion with somebody here and there. They might tell me what I want to hear. I get a dopamine boost. I'm feeling good. And then, all kind of actions. So how do we do something that's sustainable? Do you know what I mean? A conscious capital that's, I know I'm asking a big question here, that's sustainable in the long term, you know what I mean? Or because it's such this meaning pandemic or epidemic, whatever, it's such a big issue, you know what I mean? This crisis of meaning. So what would be the way to kind of make sure we can do something more sustainable?
I think there's only one thing, right? Like when we talk, about like the hierarchy of your values and your priority, like your core, you have to align with somebody on their core. You have to talk to them at the level of their core, and to you also answer from the level of your core. And it's incredibly difficult, right? Because if you're like turned down or ridiculed for something that you deeply care about, I mean, that's as personal as it gets, right? But it'd be, if I had to break it down to like a multiple step process, it would be first like really understanding someone, which even if you haven't talked too much, you can get quite a lot from how people talk and how they present themselves, and then and then it gives you like an overview of what they really care about. And if you're able to also understand and show that it's that you can also help along this path, well, then you're creating the initial bridge, that would help create a link, between the core, like a really strong spiritual link. And then, it builds step by step. You build the trust by answering, from a true and authentic place, and people realize that, right? And if you get that back from the other person after multiple steps, then you can talk in a really authentic manner. And when somebody knows your core, when they know what you care about, they can call you out for the misalignment. They can also tell you, things about yourself that you wish somebody else would have told you, and that's when you've got like something incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I think that's very valuable. There's a lot of value in that, and that's something I think it's trying to connect someone in a bit of a deeper level to be able to. And the question that comes to my mind, and I have to kind of watch my words carefully here, but in today's society, that you said it's about building that trust. But even on the very basic level, there's such a low level of trust that people would not even want to engage with you to that level where you can better understand them. Does that make sense? I think, and that trust stems from a lot of things. There's a lot of divisions, and I don't know, people are afraid of getting canceled, saying the wrong thing that might upset someone, because everyone is upset these days about everything. So how do we? I'll throw myself under the bus. I've been in, for example, Manchester for almost a decade, and I can say there's only a handful of people that I can, get to that level where you talked about, where they can hold me accountable, I can hold them accountable. And with the others, I wouldn't say it's because, it's not that I don't like them or anything, it's just I don't know enough about them. There seems to be kind of a distrust or something like that. Does it make sense? So how do we kind of tackle that bigger problem? Because if there's no trust in the first place, then we're not even, there's no way to even get to that level where with somebody.
Yeah, it's an incredibly tricky one, because I think there's two things, right? There's one thing, like what we can do as people, like what we can do with the people that we meet, and with the people that we meet, not everybody's receptive. You can be the one who actually takes the first step, who talks from a place which is authentic, which tries to reach somebody on the core. If they're not receptive, there's nothing much that we can do about it, right? One of the reasons they might not be receptive is because they also themselves might not have been receptive enough to their own core, to who they are, to be able to seize the opportunity, to seize like the outreach that you're doing. So that's what we can do on a personal level, but on a social level, well, I mean, there's so much that we could do as a society to make it possible for people to be able to engage like this. I mean, there's a general climate of mistrust, like a conception of what it is to be human, which is fundamentally flawed. Like this conception, which stems from the philosophers of suspicion, Freud, Marx, shit to an extent, which consider that, behind everybody's mind, there's always something negative, desire to dominate, desire to get something out of people. And so this underlying schema, it's also making it that people simply don't want to put out their self out there, And after you've gone through multiple interactions where you've seen people behave in a way which was not trustworthy, well, then in that case, people just abandon it. So I think that's what we could do, as a collective, to put that faith back in people.
This is a very good question. I'm going to start diving deep into it before we move on, because you said about the societal level. I really like that. Obviously, there's the individual level, and there's nothing we can do if somebody's kind of reserved and doesn't want to kind of go. That's okay. But as you said, there's the societal level. And call me out on this one. I might be a bit. So I'll talk about my life experiences. So I live obviously in the Western world. I also have my family in the Middle East. Whenever I go to the Middle East, for example, or at least to Kuwait, let's keep it to that region, to that country, I feel there is a level of trust. So I can easily, for example, literally like leave the door open and walk out and about and come back. And, I know nothing will happen. Nobody's out to get my stuff. And there is kind of, to some extent, I'm not going to say everyone, but that's kind of the societal level. There is that element of trust. Once again, not to try to be, I don't feel that in the UK at all. And I start behaving like that. That's the weird thing. So as soon as I step into the UK, I'm a completely different person now. I'm like very kind of watching over my back. I'm locking the door 3 times. I'm even the guy in the elevator, I'm refusing to make any sort of discussion. So there is kind of, we cannot ignore it. Yes, there is this societal level. So how do we change that? Because if that's kind of the word I'm looking for, the environment you're in, do you know what I mean? So what has to change from the higher upper level, or like what has to change on a larger scale? Because I really feel that a lot. And that's something that, sorry, I'm kind of taking over here. It's been bothering me for a while, because I always say that, what is it about, at the end of the day, what is it about as soon as I step foot here, all of a sudden this kind of level of trust is declined. I'm no longer, it just feels like everyone is, not everyone's out to get you. That's very negative, but it doesn't feel that, there isn't that kind of level of trust, or lack of a better word. It's just simply not there. And could that be because from a societal level, or from the messages we're getting from abroad? I don't know, but what's the way to kind of establish that?
That's a really good point. I feel the same too in France, because I came back to my native kind of country, France, in Paris, and I could feel the level of mistrust compared to other places where I've been in, like in South America, where people are always suspicious. There's such a level of mistrust, and in the UK, Sam, you're completely right. I think it all boils down to one thing, which is people don't trust when there is no truth. When we live in constant almost fear, and we've seen that on social media, UK government cancelling X, Y, and Z, the UK government not wanting to admit to basic truths, that the economy is not doing too well, when there is no truth, well, you live in a spirit of lie, and you cannot trust people who lie. And when this has become a social default, it pervades from the government all the way down to individual people. And this isn't something that's specific to the UK. We had the same in all countries that lived under governments which did not speak the truth. It's a complete another extent, but this is what happened in the Soviet Union, for instance. When you were not able to say that, for instance, the economy was collapsing, as it was, during the Brezhnev era, during the 1980s. Well, then social trust started to decline, which led to to the post-Soviet every man for himself attitude, and that's what we're having in the UK. It's not as visible, because of democratic government, but it's still exactly the same, which is this trust. It has to be obtained by saying the truth, so that people can be authentic and they can connect person to person.
Yeah, I'm just nodding my head here because you really nailed it. Because that's something I was thinking about the other day. I was saying there seems to be one thing we can all agree on, and there's a lot of divide now, but no matter what your ideology, left, right, up, down. There's one thing everybody seems to agree on is nobody's kind of can trust what's coming up from the higher ups. Everybody can agree on that. And as you said, I think maybe it just boils down when you know what I mean. There's no trust coming from the higher ups. It kind of just boils down to everybody. So I really think you yeah, nailed it there, because I was thinking about that the other day. Like, the one thing everybody seems to agree on is that we can't trust anything we hear nowadays, because one thing is being said and whatever the facts or the evidence or that it says another. And
But you know
maybe
what's
there
crazy?
is something around it trickling down to the individuals.
Yeah, but I think this is actually gonna get worse. What we've seen with AI, deepfakes, and all that, the speed at which content is generated, and that's why I'm saying that like it's even more important now to know ourselves, to be like aligned to our core, because we're saying, okay, well, we hear stuff like that the UK economy is doing great. We see it differently, like on the ground. So there's mistrust. But when everything that you hear and say could potentially be false, could potentially be um, generated for a given purpose, well, in that case, like we're facing a huge risk in terms of social trust.
Definitely, definitely. And that actually leads well to, because I was going to transition right now into, because I know you have a work in progress and you're writing about the problem of modernity and AI. And I was reading what you sent me. I know it's still a work in progress, but one of the things that you said is AI has intensified the sense of alienation, which I think most people can agree on. This is something that we're kind of aware. But one of the things that you say is that AI makes the world feel more alien compared to past disruptions like the Industrial Revolution. And I want you to kind of elaborate on that, because there is also that kind of counter argument, which is this is life, you know what I mean? Things happen, you go through a different wave, a new groundbreaking, whatever, technology comes somewhere along the line, it changes the way we live our world. So there's kind of a voices out there saying just get along with it, why is this different, and they'll give you that classic, which is annoying me, that calculator example. People back in the day were against calculators, why are they against AI? So how is this different? Somebody would say this is just another revolution we're going through, and we'll adapt, and the world will go on.
But even the notion of revolution, like it's not normal. For thousands of years, people have lived in exactly the same way. If you compare, you know, people in the first civilizations, people in Jericho, people in Mesopotamia, and then those, 5,000 years later, the core structures were still very similar. If you had to compare people in the 1700s, there was still pretty much the same order of society. A society which was very much tied to the land, which had an important part devoted, to spirituality and warfare, which was ruled from the top down largely by monarchies. They were common structures. So revolutions and change, it's come as like a part of our life with the Industrial Revolution. There's this whole idea of cyclical time versus linear time. That for most of civilization, people were living in cyclical times. And the change was so gradual that your son could expect the same thing as you, and you could have expected the same thing as your ancestors, and that things just were pretty much stable. But now what's going on is that we have changes, so we introduced a calculator, fair enough, we don't have to use the abacus anymore. The difference is the scale at which it's increasing. The exponential increase. The fact that we now have systems which are able to process huge amounts of documents, which are becoming smarter almost month by month. And I see it, as an AI researcher, This is not normal. We're not talking about a revolution. We're talking about a tidal wave. And it's a sheer scale, It's a sheer scale, first of all, and also like the qualitative element, We've always had tools, to do things, ranging from the plow all the way to the calculator that you mentioned. But we've never delegated our thinking. If you look back to ancient philosophies, for instance, the thing that distinguishes us from an animal, any other biological being, is that we have this thinking process, we have this consciousness. And if this starts to become externalized, it's like a very important shift. And I think people underestimate that.
Yeah, I think that's very important. What you said is the first time we've delegated our thought process or whatnot, our consciousness. Yeah, that is the worry, and I think that is how this is different. So for someone like me who's not in the tech space or is not that, when I'm using it to my day to day, I'm obviously seeing that I'm becoming more reliant. But I've always, when I tell my fiance, I'm quite frightened at how quickly these things pick up. You know what I mean? And there is this element of, yes, if we keep talking to it and feeding it information, at some point, maybe I'm a bit, whatever, getting into conspiracy theories here, but it might dictate, you know what I mean, how we consume information or whatnot.
Yeah, completely. Like one thing I've recently looked into is that it has a model of you. It can understand, what you like, what you don't like, how you view the world, and it can get incredibly dangerous. And we'll get to the point, and I think that's like a frightening perspective, and I think this is probably one of the most important topics right now. We will get to a point where it will understand us better than we understand ourselves, and then is able to it will be able in a way to manipulate us. There's been some work. Some models have managed to fake their intentions or to trick the users. There was that example where one model recruited people on TaskRabbit or on Fiverr to actually to click on a captcha. But one actually knows what you will do. In that case, we're in a stage which can be even more dangerous.
Yeah, and that's really important. The question that I'm asking here is, it's moving at a very rapid pace, and it seems like we can't stop it. There's a huge amount of investment going into pushing AI without getting into politics or whatnot. There's a lot of investment. So this is gonna pick up whether we like it or not. So what do we do to adapt, if that makes sense?
That's pretty much the problem. I think the biggest problem of like this decade, my take, and it's still something that's work in progress, is that we have our only option is ethical, right? If we cannot stop it, the only thing that we can do is adapt our framework. Right? There's been all these upheavals. Like the Luddites, who broke the machines, who tried to stop technological progress. It always failed. Here, we're dealing with geopolitical interest. Like, there's no way we're going to stop that. It's going to be ethical. How do we change it within ourselves? My take is that we cannot do it by creating a brand new framework, which we've tried to do by creating a whole new postmodern ethic for the AI age. I think such an approach will be doomed to fail because it won't have any grasp on reality. It's like in these sci-fi novels where everything is neons and vaporous, where modernity is liquid, as Sigmund Bauman said, where everything moves. I think such an ethic will have no grasp on reality and will not be able to give meaning, because the reality will be liquid, right? So you won't be able to get any tight hold on any aspect of it. I think the way forward will be to adapt what worked in the past. So whether it be what we've learned from the Greeks, what ancient Chinese philosophy has discussed, about the role of parents, the role of community, Christian ethics from Judaism, from the Muslim faith, that these ethics will have to have an interface with modernity. Modernity will become incredibly complex. It will be very difficult to grasp, but the task will be to try to boil some of these objects down in such a way that they can be mapped to situations of our lives, right? So when you're dealing, with something, as in you're dealing with an incredibly complex space, which will be filled with AI agents, which are interacting with lots of other people, and you're a bit overwhelmed, you don't even know how to act. The thing will be to try to boil it down to an understanding which is closer to your life. So in that case, it will be to boil it down to, for instance, that of the town square, or that of a public forum, and here we have concepts to actually deal with it. We have concepts which will even the idea of public speaking and how do you interact with a massive audience. We've got works all the way from ethics, all the way to theories of crowds and mass manipulation in the 1930s. So we have a framework to adopt this, a framework of ethics and morality. But the only thing is that we have to find a way to decomplexify what is happening right now, to map it back to things that we can have intuitions of. Otherwise, we get overwhelmed. So that's the challenge of the age, just making it simpler so we can actually grasp it and make grounded choices.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept you mentioned about, or the challenge, sorry, that you talked about. I'm just thinking here, one of the things, so you mentioned about the challenge about going back to some of the frameworks that somewhat we were familiar with, or where there was that ethics, do you know what I mean? Now, one of the things that I know, not me, obviously, but what people will challenge is say, but these frameworks, they're kind of outdated. They don't really adapt for AI, do you know what I mean? In whatever you want to talk about, the Greeks, the ancient, the religion, there isn't something in particular about AI. And now we have this thing which is moving very rapidly. Do you know what I mean? You'll have a lot of naysayers basically saying, oh, this is very outdated. This doesn't apply to the world we're living in now. So why are we using something like that rather than, figuring it out as we go, or, making something based on modernity? So what kind of would be your thoughts on that school of thought? Not saying it's mine, but it's something I hear commonly.
Yeah, well, I mean, this would be the same school of thought that would in a way refuse movement. Like when you're a child, you can only solve specific type of problems. So we let you grow so that you can solve more. The people that consider that we should throw away things which are not fully adapted to the modern age, they're equivalent to people who would throw away children or teenagers because they're not a good fit for the adult world. Things grow, things adapt, and there needs to be learning, So it's up to us to be able to adapt these interfaces. In the ancient world, like texts were not static. Every author would modify something or would add another scholia at the bottom, because texts are dynamic. They're meant to evolve to be adapted to things. So when we talk about religious ideals, when we talk about ethics, some of which are millennia of years old, of course they cannot be transposed. You cannot transpose Greek ethics at a time when the society was much tougher, low industrialization, predicated on slavery, to the modern world. You have to find this interface. So I think that's the first thing, which is we should not throw away things simply because we have not found a way to bring them back to the present. And then secondly, which is whether they're relevant or whether it'd be better to create something new from scratch. The issue with creating something new from scratch is that we have no idea where to start. We do not have any principle. We do not have any guidance. We barely even have any difficulties in our life. Modern life is really cushy. The main problem that we have is the problem of meaning. And how do we tackle the problem of meaning? That's basically the biggest philosophical questions. But the frameworks of the past, they were actually grounded. They were grounded, in aspects of reality that we've forgotten. And I think that when we bring them back, we bring back an aspect of reality, which is, dealing with difficulty, struggle, low resources, dealing with much stronger problems that then help us understand the problem of meaning. I think the problem of meaning, you cannot understand it in a place where, in liquid modernity, as I said before. You have to understand it from life as it developed, as it developed for all of humanity, how they themselves confronted the problems. So if we bring these frameworks back, we're not only bringing back solutions, but we're also bringing back an understanding of life that is deeper than the one that we have right now. And this understanding that is deeper, it's also a solution to the problem of meaning.
This is very well put, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I misunderstood it. So what you're getting at is basically these frameworks of the past, the principle kind of still lives on. It's yes, the means in which we living our world changes and whatnot, or the vacuum, but they still. So, for example, when I read whatever a religious book or a timeless classic or whatever, yes, obviously when I'm rereading it, life has changed a lot since then, how we live our world, but the principles kind of still hold. So maybe I oversimplified that, but is that kind of what you're getting at? Is that the principles of these things are the things that we can carry on with us in this, whatever you want to call it, modernity or whatever we're moving with AI, or is that an oversimplification?
Yeah, well, there is definitely this point, which is the principles still apply, but I think also something that's maybe a bit more hidden is that the problems of the past are extremely important for today. So let's take principles of the past. For instance, one of the Ten Commandments is about honoring your parents, right? Which was very, very important in a society where we did not have the social support that we had right now. Where there were communities watching left and right, but like this principle, it was meant to ensure that we had intergenerational solidarity, right? That parents would be there for their children and the children for their parents and so on, right? Something which nowadays, when you've got orphanages where you get the state to help, is not as fundamental. But taking this principle into the modern world and understanding why this was a problem for humanity, like a problem of the human condition that we don't necessarily face today, but that is still a part of humanity. Like, I think that's where it connects us to like deeper meaning. The fact that we'd still be holding on to solutions to problems that are fundamental to us as humans, but that we don't necessarily face because of our circumstances. And I think that's when we get meaning. Even if we have solved everything, even if we live in a utopia or a paradise, we would still need to find meaning to be solving in our daily life the problem of the past. Because in all these utopias, and I'm thinking of like a work that I really like, not very well known, but it's by an author called Lafferty, and the work is called The World as Will and Wallpaper, so a play on Schopenhauer, and it's some sort of utopia which becomes fully dystopian because people have no meaning. So they go down to a state of infantilization, of building children and all that. The only way, is to solve the problems of the past. Just like you're training for a run, you run it. What are you gonna do with it? You're running the marathon. What's it gonna solve? You're doing it simply because it is solving. I mean, you could say it fulfills a specific need, but at the end of the day, it's always going to be solving a specific problem. It's going to be solving the problem of physical fitness and all that. It's the same for the mind, You exercise your mind by solving the problems that have been those of humanity all along, even if you don't face them directly. So even though we've solved these problems on an individual level, we would still have to go through the process, the problem of learning. Even though we'd have AI answer everything and solve all the problems for us, we'd still have to go through the process. That's a problem, and there we need the principles from the past, So that's I think the way to avoid meaning collapse, which is to know that we now have almost like an aesthetic, an ethical duty to solve the problems of the human conditions for ourselves, as a personal act of growth, of being connected with humanity through all its areas. Not just this hyper-modern, cushy area that we're in right now, but also problems of path and understand, why respect, why clear thinking, why reading, why intellect, why courage are important, even though they're not very useful nowadays. Because they solve a problem of human existence, and that is where meaning would arise.
Yeah, I really like that. It's a good way to look at it because it kind of answers the next question I wanted to ask. Because, as you said, I think as more and more, we've got the technological advancements and things, all the problems are being solved, the more it seems like this meaning, whatever you want to call it, crisis is being growing more and more. Because I always like to think like that. Back in the day, there wasn't much of a meaning. Like it was, you had to survival of the fittest, right? Like there wasn't even time to kind of go through a meaning crisis because it was very simple. If you didn't do what you had to do, you wouldn't survive. Now, as we got all of these kind of things, everything is cushy, everything is delivered at your doorstep, life is good. There's more time to, there's more around what is the purpose of all of this. And as you said, with AI, is now even the thinking and the part which we had to, at least we had to go through the intellectual struggle. To some extent, that's going to be, you got AI writing for you. So from what I understood it is that even though life continues to, tackle these problems, we kind of have to still, not artificially, but we need to kind of read and do these kind of things, even if they're not needed. But this is kind of like to nourish ourselves, a way to maintain purpose. Otherwise, you're just...
Absolutely. And you know what, I think artificially would actually be the word. We have to do it artificially. Just like it's not necessary for us to be fit. It's not necessary. To run, I mean, in a way, it is useful, for other tasks that we would do, mental health, cognitive development. But the act itself is not necessary. For all other aspects of life, we'd have to do the exact same thing. It's not necessarily to be knowledgeable, aware. It's not even necessary to be aligned, But these things, solving these problems that have come up through all the epochs of humanity, well then this is something that we artificially have to do, and that's where the meaning come back. Which is, even though we don't have problems now, we don't have problems of safety. We don't have problems of safety to the extent that somebody in ancient times did. We have to go back to these roots and solve these problems within ourselves, and that is what gives us meaning,
Yeah, and I can attest to that, and it makes sense because that's kind of in my day-to-day, and I've actually thought of that a lot. I was like, for example, we go every day, you go for a jog or you do something, like there isn't an actual need for that for survival right now. My job is an office job at the end of the day, or I go in, I sit in front of a computer, yet it's kind of like a feeling of feeling alive. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like I have to do that. This is nourishment. And I also tend to see other people, they're all going around, they're jogging, they're reading, these kind of things. So I like the idea of maybe we have to now, maybe that's why there's a crisis, because it's no longer the default. You have to kind of, to go back to what you say, consciously make that effort.
Exactly.
Whereas before it was the default. It was just kind of how it was. Like you wouldn't survive if you didn't do these things.
Exactly. And the issue is that these problems, they're necessary for us to have meaning. The problems of the past, which we have solved on a social level, we need to solve them on an individual level. And we cannot rely on society's solution of these problems for us, because otherwise our meaning collapses. Society is there, to give help and opportunity, to the problem, of nourishment, the problem of access to education, all these, it's been solved. It's amazing, right? But the problem of time management, the problem of knowledge, the problem of communication with others, even if they're not necessary for us to simply survive, they have to be solved. They're not necessary for life, but they're necessary for meaning.
I totally agree with that. And one of the things I want to talk with the next segment is, I know you've been hinting at a new ethical framework. You've got a channel called New Ethics. You've talked about it for a while. So, and we've had endless discussions around why there is need for, like, whatever you want to call it, a new ethics or something in the modern world. So just kind of, what might this look like, and how can this restore meaning in today's world?
Yeah, well, I think I might have to take a step back, which is this new ethics. It would depend upon a larger philosophical framework that I built, a cognitive geometry, which would explain, how we create objects in consciousness, how we think. And then ethics is a way to navigate this geometry of how we build the world in order to like live it in a way which gets the best outcome for ourselves and others. If I had to just summarize it, I'd say one thing, which is, I think we have what we need. Things have been said for millennia. Humans haven't changed much. We're fully aware of that, right? The only thing that we needed for new ethics would just this overall synthesis. Kind of like we have learned things because of the modification of the world, but the overall synthetic framework, for that would in a way systematize all this different knowledge in a way that's relevant for the modern world. Well, that's what we need.
Yeah.
So not a upheaval, just a synthesis.
It's a synthesis. So I'm going to ask you a question too. I know this is dubbing it down a lot, but what would you say for this framework or larger philosophy that you're working on? What would be the key components or the key pillars? You know what I mean? Like 3, 5, whatever. What would be the key for this to happen? You know what I mean? What are the essentials that if they're not there, then you know what I mean? It's wishful thinking.
Mm. Well, that's a great point. I think. I think here you're talking more about the methodological aspect, right? So I think it would rely on a model of how we think of the human mind. Would see the world broadly going, and this might seem like science fiction, but there's always a few core principles which tell us how things will go, and I think this is pretty much it. When we have a conception of who we are and what we're doing, what we're building, with things like AI and all that, connected to, then we have like an understanding of the interaction between the two, and that's when we can create this map between ethics of the past and the current state of things.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. So what I'm getting at, and maybe because somebody asked me this question recently, so I'm kind of asking, and I didn't have the best answer. So I think I told you, like, I think 2 weeks ago, I was chatting to a close friend, and he likes to dabble in these kind of conversations. And I was telling him, there's a crisis of meaning and this and that. And then he told me, so did you find, like, not did you find the answer, but what does meaning mean to you? Like, what's purpose? What does it boil down to? And to be honest, I didn't kind of have the best answer. I just kind of was like, family, society, but it was a very kind of ABC kind of answer. Does that make sense? So the reason why, this is what I'm trying to get at, like for this, to overcome some of the problems you're talking about now, right? With AI and alienation and people are going to be more and more sort of far removed from reality. what are the key things we need, does that make sense, we need to have in place. So I gave you my basic answer. It's not the most philosophical answer, but I always say, maybe I'm old school, we need to go back to communities, like this is when we feel purpose is at its strongest. We need to go back to having those connections. So what would it look like for you, or for your thought process, or your the framework you're putting
I
together?
think exactly what you're saying, which is it's always going to have to be lived space. Always going to have to be interpersonal relationship, a community of people that you can trust, that you will have to see. There's been this thing going on right now, like in the AI community, which is, given that we cannot trust anything online, we will have to go back to in person, and it's been a long time coming. Internet has already created that, which is, we need people that we can sit around a fire, or in a living room listening to music, and sharing experiences which are just the most fundamental ones that we have, the embodied experience of being with other people, sharing something we care about, talking, speaking, reading, doing an activity together. So this would be the main requirement, like lived communities. And secondly, doing them in a way where there's two things. The communication is on the spiritual aspect, so that we talked about like half an hour ago, which was, this hierarchy of priority. What is meaning? What's important? Can we talk, person to person, face to face, but talking about the core. And then secondly, developing it, through books, through confrontation, through even sometimes tough talks, But I think they can only happen, within these communities. Big cities, I don't think will be a great place for that. So I really see, there was this French president, Georges Pompidou, that at one point said that the luxurious living in the future will be to live like a rich peasant of the earliest 20th century. There is something to it, We're going back full circle, and healthy living, natural foods is the way of the future, and communities, but communities which, unlike the past where you were stuck there, communities which are chosen and intentional. That's the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I'm smiling here because it's very, very relevant, because that's kind of what I've been going at. And I remember when I brought him, he came over to Manchester, and we just sat and we had a really nice long chat. Yes, we didn't solve, all the problems of the world, but there was like a sense of a feel good for both of us coming out, because it's like, it's been almost, well, for me at least, it was like a couple of weeks. And for him, he's like, I don't know how long has it been since I've just had a sit down with someone and we got to, have just a nice conversation about life and so on. And just tying it over to another thing, maybe I like what you said around having to kind of have more of these discussions, because what I see, especially with AI now, and I think I went on this rant, and I'm not going to turn this podcast into this rant, is, as you said, everything now, especially with AI, everything is looking very similar. The way people write, everyone is writing in the AI way. So it reached to a point where I'm actually jumping to creators and I'm telling them, let's jump on a video call, because I don't even feel like I know who this is. We're all talking the same way. I want to actually get to see the person, like, even if I can't virtually because they're not in the same country and whatnot, just to get to know who they are, because everybody's kind of the same NPC or AI generated. I'm guilty of this to some extent. I'm not. So there is an element of going back to having these, like discussions, or going back to, for lack of a better word, the old school or the old way of doing things. Probably, I think there's something around that.
Yeah, completely. I think that's what we're gonna do this synthesis, which is see that we've made pretty big mistakes and we're not going into the right direction. Take what's good from the current age, which is basically freedom. We've got the freedom of information, the freedom of action. We were strapped as was the case in the past, and combine that with what worked in the past. So we're gonna have the synthesis, or at least I hope, like in the coming decades, because people won't be fulfilled with the way things are currently going.
Definitely. So I'll probably jump on to the next question now. So for the listeners now, we had a lot of talking about some of the works you've done, but for somebody listening to this podcast, and there's a lot of people I know who are like this, not necessarily listening to the podcast, but a lot of people who are going through this. They're overwhelmed by this pace of change, and they see a lot of like societal misalignment, and there's like this burning kind of urge inside of them. They feel something is completely off. What practical steps can they take? Do you know what I mean? Moving forward, to build conscious capital, as you say, or to engage with these ethical questions. So what can they do for someone right now, like came out of this podcast? What's the next direct step they can do in the upcoming days or weeks?
That's an excellent question. I'd say it's building mental defense. And it implies like building almost like a counter world to what's going on right now. So the books of the past, which talked about problems that we're not facing, but that show underlying strategy. So going back to philosophy, to the great novels, things that build an alternative way of viewing the world. That give enough of a cultural awareness and understanding to be able to take a critical stance on what's going on. Not to be drowned by it, but also to take a critical view on it. I think this is the best way. So there would be one which would be to say, okay, well, I'm jumping in and I will, take advantage of this opportunity, create products, learn about AI. Great, but the spiritually aligned approach would actually be to use that moment to solve this problem that they're facing, of misalignment by simply building enough awareness, by using the awareness of people from the past.
Right. So the practical tip would probably be to go to works of the past and take the spiritual route rather than the opportunistic route, because it seems like now there's this opportunity with AI you can do whatever the hell you want so easily, and there's a lot of whatever ways to get capital or to make so it's to take the road less traveled, or the more grueling route, or the more intellectually stimulating route, which is to kind of do your own homework and go back to.
Exactly. I think that's the only way you can really thrive in this epoch, which is, I think it's going to steamroll the lack of individuality, which is technical skills, all this won't be irrelevant, but it will be way less valuable. If you've built enough culture that you can see things differently from a pre-trained generic autoregressive language model, well then you've got something to bring, and then you can be critical about it, and I think that's where freedom really lies, when you've got enough consciousness to be able to see what's going on, and to have some sort of counter worldview.
Yeah,
I think that's the best defense.
I like that, because I kind of got the essence of it, which is to have that core foundation of knowledge, so that when you engage with these AI tools, you can still use them to be more efficient and whatnot, but you kind of have that critical insight to know what's factual or what's misleading or what's deceiving, and you know what I mean, rather than just blindly be taken in whatever this thing feeds you, and letting it kind of mold your mind or thought process. Yeah, I think So it's very good, because that's kind of what I tell people. Obviously, I'm not into that space, but I always say, before you go on and ask AI to do a task for you, know it really well in the first place, and then kind of you can ask AI to kind of as you go, rather than fully relying on it. So I think that's really, really important. I know we're getting a bit late, so I'm just going to kind of ask a couple of more questions, but urgency of these issues. I know you're big on urgency, and you always talk to me and you tell me, brother, there's a big urgency, there's a need. So what is the urgency? Like, what would you say to our audience? Why should they take action? Why is this? So one of them might say, okay, there's no sense of urgency. It's not like somebody's knocking on my door and is trying to, whatever, slit my throat or shoot me. What happens if we fail to address some of the things you talked about in today's podcast?
That's a good one. I think there is actually urgency that people feel, but they don't know how to address, which is the urgency of dissatisfaction. The urgency of not knowing where they're going, the urgency of seeing the world change but not having any grasp in it. But more importantly, the urgency of anxiety, which is the problem of our age, right? And some feel it more strongly than others. But even for the most, dynamic people, there is still some form of anxiety of where is the world going? Where will I fit in? Will I be able to live the life that I want in exactly the way that I want them to have? And the only way to solve this problem, which in a way is important because if you haven't solved this underlying anxiety that you have concerning the state of the world, well then that means that you're not fully living. There's some sort of internal issue that's going on which prevents you from being fully there. This problem of anxiety, I think it can only be solved with an ethical framework which reassures you, which tells you, okay, well, I've considered all other options, this is the right way to go. However the world may change, I still know that these are principles that I hold to. And so the urgency of actually applying this is not to fall prey to ever increasing anxiety and then fall into it's just not open to life as you should.
I really like how you said that, and probably, as you said, the better question to ask was not necessarily what happens if we don't solve it. So I think we are at a stage now where people are realizing, something is off. So the realization is there, but as you alluded to, there is that sense of, but I don't know how to solve this going forward. There is this lack of meaning, lack of whatever. The world is moving at a fast pace, but there's a lot of there's a sense of helplessness, for lack of a better word, where it's like, where do I even go? So if I understood it correctly, that's where there's probably a need for kind of a framework or some sort of guidance. So now we're aware of that problem, but hopefully what we would try to unpack in your work and what you're going to be working on and continuously working on is kind of the solutions, or not necessarily the solutions, but what's the guidance, what's the way to move forward, if I understood it correctly.
Exactly right.
Brilliant. Final question. I know I've been saying it for a while. Are you optimistic about our ability to adapt to these challenges?
Oh yeah, completely. Well, I'm optimistic for individuals, for people. I'm less optimistic though for governments, collectivities, and all that. I think we've got an inertia, like in the wrong direction now. Let's be honest. We talked about truth and trust in collectivities and governments. There, I'm not particularly optimistic, sadly. But I think for people, I think people have an incredible ability to adapt to things. The only thing that's missing right now is just a coherent solution. So I think that if a couple of people actually manage to make this known, I actually do believe that people will, adopt it, improve upon it. So that I'm optimistic about.
Brilliant. I like that. So I'm on the same boat as you. More optimistic on the individual level. I think people we can figure it out. Maybe not so much on a higher level. So just before we sign off, for people who listen to this podcast aren't interested and want to learn more. So, by the way, for the people listening, he's a very humble guy. He is a PhD candidate at Cambridge, and he's done a lot of lovely work. So, what are you working on? What are some of the future works where you'll obviously untangle these things in more detail and discuss them? So, what should we look out for? What should we expect from Matthieu in the upcoming couple of years or so?
Oh yeah, well, I mean that's gonna be Yeah, I think there's going to be three things. I mean, you're asking me a tough questions because I have so many projects. I'm not even sure if I could commit to actually doing half of them in the long term. But I think there's three strands. So there's one which is AI related and trying to solve this problem of personalization. You know, how do we avoid making AI that can become unsafe by knowing yourself too well? You know, so that's a big problem. There's also the philosophy book that I've written, where I lay out a philosophy of mind. I explain how it works, and then a philosophical, ethical system, which is a bit less practical than what we've talked about. But a whole framework, and then the goal would be to to break this down into articles, to clarify it, to make popular facing articles and content so that it becomes a bit clearer, less academic, so that it can reach a wider audience. And I think that's a task for a good 2 years.
That's lovely. Particularly the last one, because I know I've been pushing you on that one a lot. The
So
idea of trying to get it obviously into a more digestible format, or for people who. So that's something that I really look forward to, and I think.
for the audience, it's 800 pages right now, so huge book in French. But yeah, it's like way too complex. So the goal would be to break it down, and make the actionable things come out. So what people can do based on that, and not just it be theoretical, but practical implementation.
Brilliant. And where can people find you? Yeah, if people want to learn more, what kind of social media channel are you active at, or do you have a
Absolutely.
website, or are you kind of still?
I'm still building them up, so I haven't been too good at personal branding, as you know. That's something that I've been wanting to do a lot more. But I have a website, so maybe we could put it in the link
Brilliant.
to get back to. But mainly right now on my website, and all the other channels.
Yeah, brilliant. All right then. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Matthew. Honestly, for me, this has been just fun because we have these discussions every week. So I'm really glad we got to do this on an actual podcast. But yeah, once again, thank you so much. And I'm sure you'll be here a couple of times on this podcast.
Yeah, yeah, no, it was my pleasure. It was really my pleasure, Ali. And we said we were gonna record this talk, so for sure we talk differently from the way we talk. When we're or not recorded, but it's just it's just amazing. I mean, like the ideas that we've managed to just and there's stuff I realized talking to you that I hadn't written down. So yeah, really really amazing.
Good one. Yeah, I think we can stop the recording now, or you
Yep,
have to
that's
stop it,
good.
right? Because